Hello and welcome back to Polytoots. We are taking a look in Unity with the Amplify Shader Editor. We're going to be making a burning shader that also has a dissolve at the end. So it gets burnt and then it begins to fade away. I have noticed that seemingly everyone seems to be doing a dissolve shader. At this point I wouldn't be surprised if even my mum uploaded one tomorrow. But I wanted to kind of take a lot of those techniques that are being taught and push it a bit further. So I mean, if you're just sort of learning these things, it's very easy to kind of get stuck with just what you know, and you might not know how to do anything else other than a dissolve, for example. But this is going to be about how you can take those same techniques and do more with it, basically, to hopefully give you a better understanding as to what these nodes are doing and how you can basically take control of them to do whatever it is you want. So with this particular shader, it is all controlled with one slider. We can separate it out and I will cover that, but in this one slider, the object will engulf and then fade away into an ashy nothingness. And we have a couple of other things going on. Of course, you have like the standard edge glow. If you've watched any other dissolve shader, you're probably familiar with how we would do that. There is this this nice sort of flamey animation happening underneath. Also, you may have noticed this sort of heat wave kind of effect. So this is happening on the texture itself, and if I increase this just to make it a bit more obvious, you can see it kind of makes it look like this is actually like really super hot and it's distorting the air in front of it. We will take a look at using vertex offsets on this, so it actually kind of feels almost like it's so hot that it's actually blobbing out like lava or something like that. So yeah, if this is something that interests you, then stick around, because this is what we're going to be making. Okay, so first things first, we are not going to be using the original one, of course, so we're going to start by just creating a new Amplify shader. Surface shader should be fine. So let's just try and give this a bit more space. Can I move this down? Will it let me? I think it'll let me. Close the window for now. The shader has been made, so we can always open it up again. This is a bit weird. Ah, there we go. Great tutorialing. So let's just call this one burning tutorial. Obviously yours isn't going to be called burning tutorial, but let's see. And I might as well just create a material from this while we're here. And then you can either click on the shader or the material to open up the shader editor, which is a handy little feature. Before we get started, if I just expand this out here, we're going to just set the place for it. So mine's going to be in Polytoots / burning tutorial. And we definitely want to change the blend mode. So transparent, and then we also want to enable alpha to coverage, which is a new thing to me, but without this, when your object gets lit, even if it's fully transparent, you still see the lights that are hitting it. So maybe there's a better way to do this, but as far as I can tell, alpha to coverage just fixes that. So transparent, alpha to coverage, I think that should be it. Maybe the blend RGB, we'll see when we start making the shader, if anything a bit weird pops up. So I've just done that. And if you're not aware, the shader name here, it's not actually the name of your shader file or your material. It'll be the location. So for example, over here, it's now in Polytoots / burning tutorial. So it'll just do this, basically. If you didn't know that, you probably already did. So we're going to go start with the, well, we're going to first put this material on here, so we're starting with nothing. We're going to create the animated fire effect first, and we do that with just like a clouds map from Photoshop. I already have one made, obviously. I will include these files in the description, so you can follow along exactly, and if you run into issues, then I should be able to identify where those issues are. So there's a couple of ways that we can make like a texture node. Obviously you can right click or hit space and just search for a texture sample, or you can actually just drag and drop one in, which is fair enough. The only issue here is we don't actually want a texture sample. We want a texture object because we're going to be referencing this texture a few times. And this is one of those things where if you don't know this beforehand, it's okay. Like, you can start off with a bunch of texture samples, but then when it reaches the point where you're having to basically reuse the same texture, then all you have to do is just swap out one for the texture object. But because I know in advance that we're going to be using at least, I think, 2 of our textures across multiple nodes, then we might as well start with a texture object, which basically allows us to reference a texture into other nodes. So now if I were to just hold the T key and then click to drop in like your standard texture sample, I can hook this one into that, and so I can do this again, for example, so this becomes that, and so I only have one texture node, which is pretty handy. So for now, I'm just going to leave this as it is with just the one, and I will call this just mask or something like that. And I'll just drop my texture into that. Then we'll stick that into emission, and immediately you should be able to see the texture be applied. So that's all it is. So it's just a clouds map that was generated in Photoshop. So we need to kind of refract this, and the best way to do that is through a normal map, and then we're going to animate it. And what happens is when the texture begins to scroll, it will be scrolling itself through a map that we're using to refract it, which will create this sort of weird, almost watery like effect. But it works well for flames, for water, for smoke, anything sort of organic, even like a toxic kind of environment. It's nice. You can control the strength, you can change the colors. It's a good thing to know. It's very versatile. So the first thing we're going to do is we'll get the refraction done. So we'll drop in another texture object. We could again use a texture sample, but I know for a fact that I'm going to be referencing this normal map again and again. So use this flow map normal, and again I will provide this texture. I'm pretty sure I made this one, so I can provide it. I think I did a shader tutorial before where I wasn't completely sure if I had made the textures or if I had just grabbed them from the Google and done like some sort of conversion. So I apologize for not sharing the textures there. But anyway, we'll call this distortion map. Default texture is set to bump, and so now texture 2D. Run this into here, and make sure when you're referencing a normal map, on your texture sample you want to just use the unpack normal map, and so now it will actually register it as a normal map, which is always handy. My computer seems to have frozen again. Oh, okay, there we go. So we're going to be using this normal map to basically refract this texture, and the way that we do that is we first have to output the RNG channels, the red and green, or in this case it would be X and Y. That's kind of the equivalent. So we're going to be splitting this out basically into a component mask. So if we feed in the XYZ here and we select this mask, we can see the parameters to output. If we just wanted to output X, Y, and Z, we wouldn't need a component mask because we could just hook this straight into anything else. But we only want X and Y, or in other packages this would read as RNG. So we do that, and then we will we're going to use a multiply node because this will feed into a value that we can control basically. So I'll do that now. In fact, for now I won't make this a property just yet. I'll just put in a float value, which by the way you can just open up float we'll leave it at 1. We won't make it a property yet, so I'll show you what this will do. And that basically just feeds straight into the UVs, and already you can see, bring this over here, something is happening to our texture, so like that. But at this point, because we are controlling the UVs of this texture with just a normal map, if we set the power of this refraction to nothing, the texture we end up with is actually nothing, because essentially we're not feeding it any UV information. We've said this is our UV coordinates for this texture, and if you set the value at nothing, you will get nothing. So what you can just do is go and create a texture coordinate, which will give you UVs, and you can just add this. I'm just going to hold the A key and click to put that in, so we can just add these two onto there. And so now if we have a refraction of 0, we at least still have our texture, so that's pretty cool. So this float value we made before, I'm just gonna rename this as distortion amount, and we'll change it to a property so that it's actually visible on the material itself, and I will give it a max value of 1, so it's just a slider, which, if you didn't know, that's how you make sliders in Amplify. And let me just apply this to the material so you can actually see it happening on the model. So we have our 2 textures and distortion amount, and you can see what's happening here. It's just distorting our texture based on the normal map that we've put in. So if you have a different normal map, you could maybe do some things with very sort of geometric patterns and still refract over that. It doesn't have to be some random kind of mess, but for fire or water or something, it kind of helps to have nothing too geometric. So that does that. You can increase this amount if you want to kind of push that refraction even further. For our purposes though, this is more than okay. So I'm just going to tidy this up a little bit, because eventually, I mean, we're going to be dealing with a lot of nodes, so it's best to try and keep things a bit tidy while you can. So the next thing we're going to do is actually just we're just going to scroll this texture along the surface, and since we already have the texture coordinates in place, we can just take advantage of this and drop down a panner node, which is what you use to basically pan images along either like an X or a Y. So we're going to hook this into our offset, because the offset is what we want to animate. In fact, let me just disconnect that. I think if I show you the offset, if I just start doing this, you can see already in the mask input that it is affecting that. So this is for sure the value that we need to be concentrating on. So our panner will work on the offset. And in fact, sorry, let me just also explain the panner. We can set some values here. These are our UVs, so I don't think we need to do anything with those because we're already feeding those through here. So we can set a speed, which is a bit confusing because this also acts as your direction. So a speed of 1 on the X means that it will just it will be moving at 1 on the X. So it is as much speed as it is direction. So set that to 0, and then Y, for example, 1 goes that way, or -1 goes up. Didn't hit the minus key. -1 goes up. So now it's going up, and we kind of just want to leave it at that, to be honest. We do want to control the speed ourselves as well, but we're going to feed some stuff into the time node. So speed itself, which we're just using for the direction, we're going to leave it on the actual panner node itself, and we're going to put in a property for the time to actually kind of control the speed, which is why I was saying it's a bit confusing. We're going to be using speed for the direction, and we're going to be using time for the speed. So we're going to put down a time node because we need it. So just time, And then similar to here, you just want to multiply it by a value. So, I mean, this is one of those. It's a really common thing. If you're new to shaders, it's worth kind of keeping in mind that whenever you kind of see something go into a multiply and then into a value, it's usually to control the strength of it. So I'm just going to hold down the 1 key, and I'll put down a float here, and we will call this scroll speed, and make this a property. And for now, I'll set it to 0 to 1. We might need to tweak that later. So this goes straight into time, and we'll apply that. So as you see, nothing's moving on the shader just yet because our scroll speed is set to nothing. But if we increase this, you can see that it is moving around. And you might be wondering why in this example it scrolls upwards, like from the south to the north, but on this model it's kind of going across it. That just depends on the UVs of your model. We're not going to dive into sort of mapping like world coordinates onto an object in this tutorial. We might look at that later on, but for our needs, for just making something look as though it's sort of engulfing itself in flames, this will do nicely. So the next thing we're going to do is basically just recolor this, and we're going to just do that by dropping in 2 colors basically. And I'm going to hold the 5 key for this and click, or if you want, just space or right click and go and find it. So we'll create 2 colors, and we'll set them both as properties, and we'll call one warm, I guess warm, and the other one hot. I mean, it's fire, they're technically both hot. You could have hot and hotter, doesn't matter. Ouch 1 and ouch 2. And what we're going to do is we're going to use a lerp node. Just going to hold L and click in place. Sorry if I'm skipping through a bit of this. For now, I might as well set just a default color just so we can actually see what's happening. Because if you try to lerp from black to black, then you won't really notice anything. So just pick 2 rough colors, so A and B. And if you don't know about lerps, it's basically something to transition from one parameter, not sure if that's the correct word, but one parameter to another. So in this case, it would go from orange to yellow. And so if I just drop down a float just to do this, make it into a slider, put that into alpha. I'm going to hit the P key, so now it will enable previews. In fact, I probably should have had that on from the beginning. So it starts off in orange, and if I move this slider, it turns to yellow. And if you have it halfway, then it's always somewhere in between. Another way to think of it is black equals orange, and then white equals yellow, or, you know, black equals warm, white equals hot, which we can take advantage with because we have this grayscale sort of mask texture. So we can do something like this, and you can see the, if I make this something a bit more obvious, so green, like that's even worse, but green equals our warm color, which would be the black, and then yellow equals our hot color, which would be the white. And I'm just going to put this back to some sort of orange. And we can, like if I were to just hook this into the emission now and have a look at it, it's there, but the contrast between the colors isn't great, and so there is a little trick you can do to kind of boost the colors and make them more kind of more contrasted. Essentially, we want to increase the contrast. So we're going to use a power node, if I spell it correctly, and we are also going to want a multiply node, and we're going to do this over essentially 2 values, but both of these will be the same. So we're just going to create another float, and we'll give this, let's just say 1 for now. So we're going to hook this into the power, and then power goes into multiply, and then we're going to use this exact same value and hook that into multiply. So if I just hit the P key here, you can see what we're going from. If I increase this value just to make it a bit more obvious. So here's the original loop, and then we're using a power node and we're multiplying that by 2. So it's essentially just increasing the contrast of this image. So if I were to hook this original image here, we have this grayscale. It's sort of got lots of midtones in it. You know, there's not a lot of lows, not a lot of highs, and so we're feeding it through a power to darken it out, and then multiply will kind of just basically it will times it by 2. So we're getting twice the brightness and twice the darkness, similar to how you would use curves or something in an image in Photoshop. You can boost the lows and the highs. So that's essentially that. So we're going to feed our lerp back into here, and I'll keep the previews on, which means I do need to do a bit of rearranging. I'll be back in a second. Okay, so that should do. I'm just going to move this mask to none out of the way. So we'll then just replace all of this with that actual end result. So that is now, it's a lot more powerful. My emission is kind of hiding this. I think I have something on my camera. Sorry about that. So we have a post-processing on, but if I turn this off, you can see it's the oranges are a lot more orangey, the yellows are a lot more yellowy. So we'll leave that at that for now. So we have the colors, which of course you can adjust. It doesn't have to be fire, it can be whatever you want within reason. And then this distortion, so with that it's just it's a regular cloud mask that's just scrolling, but if we introduce this refraction you get some real nice results. Scroll speed as well, you can either have no scroll, although I don't know why you would, or you know, something smooth and slow, or something fast and rapid. I'll keep it at about sort of 0.4-ish for now. So that will do for this part of the tutorial. I don't want to overload you with too much just yet, but in the next one we'll be looking at the burning itself, which is sort of like an opposite of a dissolve, and then we'll also do the heat distortion stuff, so it looks like this thing is so hot it's actually refracting the air in front of it. So yeah, I hope you found this helpful so far, and stick around because we're going to be continuing in the next one.